Hi, I'm Meshal Malik, and you're watching Indus Special. On today's show, we take a look at the social media and tech stories making the headlines. We first begin with the latest move by Twitter, in which the social media platform has banned political ads. While this new development sparks debate, one of the central questions being asked is what impact does this have on freedom of expression? And if Facebook should follow suit. We take a closer look at this story. Joining us for this discussion today is Mr. Santosh Rao, technology analyst and head of research at Manhattan Venture Partners, joining us from Manhattan. We're also joined by Mr. Ivan Mehta, reporter at The Next Web, a website that focuses on new technology and startup companies in Europe. He's joining us from New Delhi. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Mr. Rao, let me begin with you. And I'm going to talk about what has been making waves since last week, which is, of course, Twitter banning political ads on its platform. Let's go through this. And from your perspective, what impact do you think political ads have had on the democratic process as a whole in the past couple of years?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think Twitter, Facebook, and social media in general have the potential to cause trouble. But I would say more than 90 to 95% of the time, it serves a good purpose. There are always abuses everywhere. Even in the mainline media, you have biases and everything. There is false advertising. All that goes on. That's part of the game. But I think social media, you have to accept the fact that the primary source of information for the new generation, the millennials and the younger generation, is the social media now. So I think it plays a very big role. It needs to be monitored. You really cannot ban it. The horse has left the barn already. Now the only thing we can do is put some guardrails around it, try to define what's hate, what's right, what's wrong, what's liberal, what's conservative. I don't know. So Twitter and Facebook should not be in that business of deciding what's right and what's wrong. It's the public that should decide what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
So I think overall, I think you have to keep it. Banning is not the solution. That's
right. Mr. Rao, now just let me go back to what you mentioned here, which was 90% of the information you feel is positive. How do you come up with that figure, that 90% of the information that is being put out on these platforms is positive, and the rest of that 10%, odd 10%, might be causing some trouble?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going by the example of, this whole thing, this whole debate came up during the last presidential election and how people are distorting, how the Russians distorted the messages and all that on Facebook and all that, all the bots and all the other stuff. But if you think, I'm of the camp that did not really, maybe on the edges, maybe a little bit here and there, but overall, I think this is a powerful medium for people who don't have power. So, okay, you don't want people to buy ads, but that's the only way to get on the mainstream. That's the only way to get attention. People who are influential don't need this. And then there's a question of what is right and what is wrong. And that's the bigger question. Who's censoring this? How do you censor this? And Twitter can say, I don't want anything. We want only like social aspects, kind of things that improve the process. I don't know how he's defining that. I think I like Facebook's idea. Just leave it open. Let the people decide what's right and what's wrong.
All right. So I take your opinion there that you like how Facebook is going about this. They are providing a more open avenue. They're saying let political ads come in, let the revenue come in as well with this. You also seem to say that it didn't have that much influence. Well, it does seem in the United States that influence is something that many of the people are causing for an impeachment of the president for, but that's besides the point. I'm going to go on and talk to Mr. Mehta about what is happening, and I want his take on this as well. Mr. Mehta, do you also share this more optimistic view about political ads? Do you think that they should be allowed to run, they should be funded, and it's not really social media platforms to decide?
So let's take a look at. One of your slides was an article from TechCrunch, and which take a look, which it clearly mentioned, and both Twitter and Facebook mentioned that their revenue from political ads was not much. I think Twitter was around their 0.1% of share, and Facebook was 0.5% of their revenue share. So if you look at the revenue, it's not really that much. And if you look at Twitter, the most of the political content which is out there is ads. Like, for example, say President Donald Trump, US President Donald Trump tweets something that is political, but it's not an ad. So people on politics don't really need ads to spread their political agenda or political message, whatever that may be. Now, political ads, it's hard to define what is political. After Facebook said that we are not banning political ads, one of the men in California said that I'm going to run for a senator, and just so I can run false ads. And then Facebook said we are not going to allow you to do that. Now their Facebook is drawing guidelines, but Facebook generally said that we are not really doing anything about the ads. Twitter, on the hand, they have said that they are banning ads, but they haven't clearly defined the policy as of yet. What they've said is they're banning candidate ads and they are banning some issue ads. Now, issue ads also has something on the basis of climate change. Now, climate change is not really a political issue. So
Of course,
where do you
it's a
stop?
political issue when it affects the economy and when political activists are involved in it.
I understand, but there are scientific facts to that, right? It's not just a political issue. When you can't say that climate change is just a political issue, right? So it's hard to define these boundaries as we are discussing it. We are not agreeing as to if it is a political issue or not. It's hard for these platforms to kind of issue these boundaries. So there should be a broader debate around what political ads should be blanketly allowed or what shouldn't be allowed.
Right.
It's right that these platforms are not really true judges of what the good content is.
Mr. Mehta, hold on for a second, because I just want to read Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey's statement, and let's take it from there. I want your take and Mr. Rao's take on it, in which he says that a political message earns reach when people decide to follow an account or retweet. So he's basically saying that when something gains momentum online, when people choose to retweet it or like it, that's when it's organic. But when paid content is promoted because it is funded, that's not truly organic. That, of course, comes with many ties attached. How much funding a political opponent or a political person is getting, and how much reach they're able to gain from that. Now, of course, this brings to question the concept of echo chambers and the creation of echo chambers when you're able to fund a certain message. Now, I'll take my question firstly to Mr. Rao and ask him. Now, in all of this, we're talking whether or not Twitter should ban these political ads, but we have also seen how echo chambers often become a problem. In this specific instance, don't you think that there might be some value to banning these ads?
Well, see, this is the new age now. I mean, this is how things get done. This is how information flows around, and it's a level field. Anyone can get on Twitter and do what they want, and if you are very active, very influential, you will get the following, and you will go on and build your influence on that. So I think everything's out there. My big issue is where does Twitter come in? Where do they come in and decide what's right and what's wrong? It's a very tough thing to do. There's always a liberal versus conservative, political versus non-political. Everything can be sliced that way. Climate change, for the earlier speaker, climate change is definitely political at this point. There is science on both sides. So, it's become a Republican versus Democratic issue here also in the U.S. So I think everything can be put in that prism where it's this or what is right and what's wrong. And we all know that social media in the U.S. slants left. So there is an inherent bias, so they have to prove that they're not left. So all those issues are out there. So whatever they do, I think it's going to not seem right for one party or the other. So that aside, so in terms of organic versus inorganic, that again is very, very difficult. In the beginning, you need to buy ads. That's the only way to get your stuff message around, that message across in the initial stages for the political parties and all that. But I think people will get smart over time. They will realize what is right and what is wrong after a while. So I think if it's blatantly false and propaganda, it will come across. I think we are misunderstanding or underestimating the intelligence of the public.
So Mr. Rao, I will like to interject there.
Easily,
I would like to interject there. There was a case in India which caused lynchings amongst the public because of fake messages that were circulated across WhatsApp. I'm not underestimating the intelligence of the public, but I am stressing on the misinformation caused through social media, and that is, of course, costing lives. Can we really afford to see how events unfold and let nature take its course and see how things work out?
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree with you that. I think what that comes down to is a second or third layer of this whole debate is every country, there are certain rights and wrongs in every country. So religion, lynching, beef, and this and that is very, very sensitive topic in India, not in the U.S. So I think maybe make it more localized. Twitter and Facebook can be in India and say this is the guardrail around. Beyond this is beyond the pale when you say this and that. That can be accepted. I think everybody will agree to that, and that's fine. Okay, but so there are a lot of other issues that kind of straddle the line, so you don't know where it's going. So if you just stop it for one person and not the other, then it becomes a problem.
Right.
So I think that the whole issue, the bottom line is it's not issue. Some issues are.
Mr. Mehta, his opinion on that as well. Mr. Mehta, do you agree that in some countries the rules should be different than other countries? Would you agree with that? I mean, you're talking to me from New Delhi right now. Would you agree that your laws should be different than how the laws are working in the United States?
Naturally, I mean, every country has their own culture and laws. We can't apply blanket these products. If you see just the formation of these products, a lot of companies have come into India and built product for India that might not be suited for US or other markets. That is happening all over the world. The policies should be slightly localized. You can't really have one template for everything in the world. Having said that, we can't really allow misinformation in that sense. What Jack Dorsey's tweet says about organic content, you and I know that there are social media campaigns. I can spread a fact without really paying an apparent ad. I can get an army of bots to retweet for me. I can hire influencers to tweet for me. That's not really a problem here when it comes to ads, because ads are defined, right? So you know that this ad is paid for and that should be regulated in some way. Otherwise, once the ads are banned, what happens is now, unless and until you don't have clear enough policies, there are numerous ways political parties will get across their messages by different social media strategies, including bots, including influencers, including different kind of methods. Facebook regularly post blog posts saying that we ban inauthentic behaviors from different countries. That is one of the ways how perpetrators of fake news actually gets around these boundaries and guidelines and spread whatever they want to.
Right, so you bring up a very interesting point, and that's something that I'm going to put to you, Mr. Van Mehta. You say that when ads are banned, when an ad, see an ad, you're already skeptical just because of its nature. You know that it's paid and stuff. You look at it more critically. If an ad is banned, you will have more problems in detecting misinformation. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, if an ad is banned, I really don't know. Anyway, so first thing is ads are very, a very minute part of both social networks. In terms, I'm talking about political ads especially. Uh, and if there is no political ad, I'm not really sure if it is paid content or not. Uh, I have to see through a lot of information. I'm a professional in the world of information, but the people who aren't, they really don't know if it is true or not, or if it is a paid thing or not. So it becomes hard when I don't think I'm not saying that Twitter shouldn't ban ads, but then they'll have to do more to see through content, and they'll have to define their policies. And Facebook has to do that. Any social media platform has to have clear
Right.
policies around it. And that won't be done in a day, obviously. Like that'll take time, that'll take consultancy, and that'll take feedback from public.
Right. Mr. Rao, so you talked about how you agree with how Facebook is going about things. I want to put a recent case to you in which 250 employees within Facebook came out and put their signatures in which they urged Facebook to hold political ads to the same standard that it holds other ads towards. This came after Facebook said that it would not fact check political ads. The reason why I'm putting this to you, of course, is because you are an expert when it comes to technology. And these are people within Facebook themselves who see it as a problem when Facebook says, no, we're not going to fact check political ads. Do you see that as a problem, not fact checking political ads?
Who's the fact checker there? Who will decide what's right and what's wrong? And you have to realize Facebook and Google, to some extent, are smarting over the fact that there is a belief or line of thinking that they, in effect, helped Trump become the president. So this is one example. So they want to get more. They tend to be very liberal. They don't want all that. They feel that money is kind of distorting the whole thing. But I feel that they cannot sit there and make a judgment of what is right and what is wrong, and the employees definitely cannot. You can have the machines do it, the algorithms do it. Even the algorithm is made by people. The parameters that are put there, that again can be liberal or conservative. So at every stage, there tends to be bias of some kind or the other. So I think that you just have to leave it, let it go in the open, let people decide. I mean, we do that with broadcast media. Some people like Fox, some people like CNN. You just shut off Fox. You say whatever Fox says is propaganda, then the conservatives say whatever CNN says is propaganda. Same thing's going to happen. People are going to decide. They're going to tune in and tune off what they like and what they don't like. Let the people decide. Don't get in the way, because it's impossible to get it right.
So, Mr. Rao, let me ask you something. Why do you think Facebook was fighting against the anti-vaccination movement?
Because, again, they're going to get into the same issue of bias. The big thing right now Facebook is fighting against is the regulators on their back. There's an existential threat to Facebook. There's talk about splitting up the company, so they might just be out of business. They might be a different company if they don't manage this well. They need to please all sides. So they're saying we are neutral. We are out there. You'll decide. Of course, we have some ways to check some Russian bots and some ads. They do check for fraud here and there, okay? And they don't want any of these the fake accounts and all that. They're filtering all those things. But overall, they don't want to have a censorship because their existence is at threat if they don't get this right. So they're very careful. They don't want to say we're just going to ban stuff.
But you would agree that in some cases they will go out of their way to try to correct misinformation or try to tackle it. So it's not like they're leaving everything for the audience to decide, right?
Some things are blatantly wrong and right, and that everybody agrees. There's a unanimous consent. Like pornography is unanimously wrong. Communal hatred is wrong. There's some humanity involved. Some
White
things
supremacy
everybody
is
agrees.
Spreading like wildfire across the United States, and many people agree with it. And it's one of the main problems that social media is facing right now. Of course, it has advocates for it. So how does social media toe the line? Mr. Mehta, that's my question to you. How do you try to find answers to these complicated solutions? And do you think we're putting too much pressure on social media?
I don't think so. We are putting too much pressure on social media. These platforms have grown a lot bigger. I mean, Facebook's population is bigger than any country in the world. So now they have a responsibility. It grew faster than they anticipated, but now all kind of people use Facebook. Look at Myanmar, where a lot of things happen just because of Facebook. Look at India. Look at other countries where Facebook is driving a lot of stuff, positive and negative both. But then it comes, you can't just, at the end of the day, you can't just sit there and say, hey, this is just a platform, because when it comes to your marketing, you're talking about positive things as well. So you should be brave enough to take negative things into the consideration when it is when the times comes like this, that what happens when political movements take place on your platform. Whenever these leaders, Jack Dorsey or Mark Zuckerberg, they are speaking. A lot of times they speak about political movements that took place in Egypt and other places where there were revolutions and people were happy. But when people are not happy, they kind of step back and say, "Hey, our platform is quite neutral," and that's fine. They can say your platform is neutral, but then they need to continuously improve on their detecting fake information, detecting whatever is driving political movement, and ensure that it's not in bad faith.
Right. On that point, thank you so much, Ivan Mehta, for joining us from New Delhi. Mr. Santosh Rao, as you talked about, the user also has responsibility. How can the user become more aware and educate him or herself?
Well, I think at some point you will realize what is right and wrong, and people will stop using the phone. I think these are ultimately businesses. They know how to run the business. Ad money is important to them. Though political ad, I mean, for Twitter, they had nothing to lose. I mean, this is an insignificant part of the whole business. He just kind of moved the conversation forward and tried to take a bigger position, kind of more, try to take a stronger position in this whole debate that is building up, and all the regulators coming on top of them. So he's just trying to preempt that whole thing. But I think users will, in the end, come to know about this. And as this conversation goes on, more and more, and some guardrails are put around it, I think people will be influenced. And the people who are gullible will always be gullible. Even when you have the best guardrails, you can always, get the people to your side. And even now, even when you see regular ads that we consider
But how can the gullible people,
exaggerate
as you're
everything.
saying, become more educated about what is happening online, what is misinformation, how to distinguish it from what are facts?
Yeah, how will they get there? I think there's just over time. I think there's common sense everywhere. You just can't fool. Everybody is not, maybe like a small percentage of the people will be influenced everywhere. But I think people overall will get to know what's right and what's wrong, and that's the way it should be, and that's the way we should get to that place where people understand social media very well and know, as it is now for WhatsApp, there's already a recognition that a lot of it is wrong. The forwarded messages and this and that, people know not to believe everything. So that kind of groundswell of opinion comes, and then now people don't take WhatsApp at face value. They don't know whether it's right or wrong. So things like that automatically come from organically from the bottom up, and you really can't force that on people or regulate that.
Right. You mentioned here, Mr. Rao, just earlier that Twitter made and took this decision because it was trying to preempt something that was going to happen in the future, which was the regulators coming at social media platforms with a more strict stance. Now, in all of this, do you think that Twitter has appeased the regulators? And do you think that now Facebook will have to follow suit?
No, I think Twitter is not off the hook. I mean, they just try to take the high ground But there will be a debate in the long term. And you have to realize Twitter and Facebook are not the same. Facebook's influence in this whole conversation is a lot more than Twitter. Twitter is a small platform. It's for the tech-savvy people, and it's more interactive. It's not as interactive as Facebook. So you really have to separate the two. Facebook has more to lose by coming in and censoring stuff and saying this is right and this is wrong. Twitter can get away with it because it's a whole different platform. I say it's more intellectual, I would say, than Facebook. And Facebook has a lot of businesses on it and all that stuff. So just let's separate the two in that sense. But so Twitter has kind of started the debate about this. But let's see where that goes.
Right.
For Facebook, it has a lot more to lose by banning stuff than Twitter.
Right. On that point, thank you so much, Mr. Santosh, for joining us from Manhattan. Now we're joined by Shmyla Khan, who's the Program and Research Manager at Digital Rights Foundation. She joins us from Lahore. Thank you so much for joining us, Shmyla. Now, as we've been talking, this move by Twitter to ban political ads, it's been going back and forth, especially on the debate we've been having on the show today. Our guests have said that Twitter should not really be the judge of trying to decide what gets banned and what doesn't. That would show bias. And Facebook doesn't do so, so it doesn't show bias. But in the past, we've been seeing a lot of activists, especially human rights activists, complain about censorship, which is not involved with political advertisements. Is that a trend you've been also witnessing?
Yeah, first of all, I think what sort of, if I could respond to what other people have said so far, I think it's important to recognize that these platforms are not neutral. They have taken on the position of an editor or a position where they are now regulating content. So we can't sort of completely absolve them of that responsibility now, because all platforms now have community guidelines, which means that they are judging content by a certain criteria. Maybe in this particular instance, when it comes to political ads, Twitter is maybe taking on a more sort of proactive role, whereas Facebook is sort of putting Facebook is putting its hands up and saying we're not going to interfere. But I don't think these platforms can sort of hide behind the sort of rhetoric of free speech and non-interference anymore, because they are taking decisions every day, millions of sort of decisions every day, either based on sort of automated decision making. So a lot of content that is regulated on these platforms is done through algorithms, which sort of it puts the criteria against a prejudged sort of criteria that they have. But it also, we've seen recently that a lot of content is now flagged. For example, it was recently reported actually almost 1 million tweets on Kashmir were blocked at India's behest by Twitter, which means that a lot of political content, while they might have taken a position on political ads, a lot of political content is still being put up by users, and that is being taken down. And we see a clear sort of bias when it comes to the content that was taken down, because content relating to Kashmir, which sort of talked about the sort of oppression by the Indian state, that content was particularly taken down. And
so Shmyla,
I think it's
sorry to interrupt here, but it seems like on one hand, Twitter says that by trying to ban political ads, trying to ban funded ads, it wants to create a more neutral space in which tweets are more organically promoted, if I can use that term. But on the other hand, it is also demonstrating a bias when it is blocking or censoring certain type of content. Would that be fair to say?
Precisely. And I think this example is a glaring example, especially in a situation where sort of internet access is completely sort of blocked from Kashmir. For that content to be taken down is especially criminal. And I think what we a lot of times when we miss what we miss in these conversations regarding content regulation is that there is still a clear power dynamic. So when we talk about India, obviously it is an economic sort of emerging superpower and has a lot of clout with these tech companies. So I think we also need to see
these
that
tech
these
companies gather a lot
are
of ad
profit-making.
revenue from that market.
Exactly.
That is, of course,
Yeah, yeah.
also ad revenue and profit, of course, is also a very integral point that we need to keep in mind while we're analyzing all of this. Since we've run out of time for this segment, thank you so much, Shmyla Khan, for joining us and talking to us about this. We're going to go for a short break. When we return, we're going to take a closer look at how the popular social media app TikTok has become the latest dispute in the ongoing rivalry between the US and China. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, the U.S. government has launched a national security review of the Chinese-based social media app TikTok. As the rivalry continues between the two superpowers, it's more than clear that the Cold War, as some experts are calling it, is focusing more and more on technology. We take a closer look at how the events have been unfolding. Joining us for this discussion today is Gilbert Van Kerckhove, who's an economist joining us from Beijing. We're also joined by Moundhir, Sajjad, Bechari, who's a geopolitical expert joining us also from Beijing. Mr. Gilbert, let me begin with you. Now, what do you make of this latest move of an investigation into TikTok? What is your reaction to it?
Very important news that just came out from the Washington Post that TikTok has declined to testify in a congressional hearing planned for this Tuesday about their links to China. With the TikTok, we can look at two separate issues. The most important one today, I would say, is security related. TikTok says that there is no censorship on TikTok that is being used outside of China. There is no control on the content. They also allege that the data servers they are using are based in the USA. However, in the US, many people still have many problems with that. And I can admit this is a little bit justified because a Chinese company not providing a backdoor when needed to the Chinese security people is very unlikely. So the whole issue is in how far can the Chinese state security control what is going on abroad with TikTok, what people are saying, their political beliefs, their data. This is the number one issue. Second issue disconnected from that is the issue of market access.
Right. Now, it is a pertinent to mention here that TikTok itself also stated that we are not influenced by any foreign government, including the Chinese government. Mr. Bechari, what do you make out of all of this? As Mr. Gilbert stated, that it is very unlikely that there isn't any influence, that TikTok isn't acting as a backdoor for the Chinese government. Do you also hold that view?
Well, I think it's very important for us to pinpoint the fact that TikTok actually was one of the most, let's say, independent Chinese companies so far. This is why actually it has been kind of like battling a certain zone of influence with Baidu and Alibaba and Tencent. Okay, therefore, what we mean by here that there always has been kind of a battle between TikTok company and the Chinese government. It's true that in a country like China, there will always be connection with the Chinese government. However, to state that Chinese government is using TikTok or using a lot of Chinese companies to basically be this backdoor, as you said, to US for whatever security reason or privacy reasons is a little bit overstated. And it's also misunderstanding that the complexity of the IT environment in China, it is not something directly linked to the government, and there's much more inner battle, as I said. Yes.
Right. Mr. Bechari, I'm going to come back to you, but before I'm going to go to Mr. Gilbert and talk to him about the state of rivalry between the two countries when we talk about technology. Where is it standing today? We've seen many events unfold over the past year alone. Where do you see it standing today?
The big issue here is, I wouldn't say really the issue of TikTok. If we look at another app that is much more important, it's called WeChat. WeChat has grown from nowhere to something close to 800 million users. WeChat has been able to grow this way because the Chinese government has expelled all competitors from their market, such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, name it. This has allowed WeChat to grow. It has also allowed, not regarding the laws. When I tried more than 10 years ago to launch a mobile payment system, I was said we couldn't do it because we needed to be a bank. Today, WeChat is doing massive banking online. This is the way that China has been nurturing all these companies to grow in this colossal market, while all the competitors cannot go in. I would say today, WeChat is a much more big danger to the American and other companies than TikTok. TikTok is just video for, I would say, okay, for amusement. But WeChat is very serious business. You can't live today in China without WeChat. So it's all a market access problem. And the foreign governments, non-Chinese government, have not been able to really mobilize the big companies to perform as good as we have seen WeChat performing.
Right. So, Mr. Gilbert, you outlined an example of another app here, WeChat, and instead of diving right into the app's example, I want to pick up on something that you stated, which was highlighting the overall issue, which is the danger it poses to the United States. And that's something that I want to go towards and understand for myself and the viewers. Mr. Bechari, take us through it. In this tech war, what are the dangers for both the markets here, the United States market and the Chinese market? What security issues are ahead when we're talking about these apps that seem to be trivial?
Well, I think there's mostly frustration from both sides, but mostly from the US that has been putting this kind of hegemony of technology. And I think it's important also to pinpoint that as soon as we use an alternative way to conduct a certain technology that is literally reshaping the entire economy of a country like China, it does pose certain threat for any countries that have had a lot to take on this technological hegemony that was through Google, or that was with today social media, Facebook and Instagram and so on. It's true that China has taken quite a strong stance, and by rejecting, as Gilbert said, of American app to come into China. But in terms of rivalry between both countries, I think it lies mostly on how each app or each technological innovation tomorrow, like AI or the use of 5G, is using this technological independence without interference of the government. It is harder to see this line in China, but at least compared to the US, which had also security issues with Facebook last year, the line is much more visible. We don't know how it is drawn, but we know that it is still linked to the government. When in the US it says it's not, while sometimes we have had also privacy issues that are different than a government security issues that has to do with this overtaking role of technology over society. So both ways have to be questions and have to be seeing from different perspectives.
Right. I hear you said they need to be seen from different perspectives, but I do want a little more clarity on all of this. When we're talking about technological hegemony, can we separate it from the security threat that apparently data might pose if it is given to another state, if specifically when we're talking about US and China, or are they both one and the same thing?
No, it's not. First of all, I do have to say that Chinese app or technology still remain pretty regional, if not only Chinese. WeChat, Alipay are only used basically in China, even though they've been trying to push it forward in different countries, but it only talks about money here. If Alipay is used or WeChat is used in Thailand or Philippines or Indonesia, it's only to facilitate money transfer. This type of money transfer is different from American system that is linked with lobbying of different banks that take commission for every single payment, which at the end is much more than the Chinese app. But when you talk about clarity about security issues, I think it has to do, first of all, about financial, data. Well, both ways we tend to have access to data. One is through banking system that tends to be much more independent in the US, but at the same time, all of those data have happened to be whether buyable or have been going through this kind of lobby system. And in China, well, yes, the government have access directly to data, but at the same time, we are talking about 1.3 billion people that do need still today, because they're in a different state of development, a much more cautious and stable way of managing data, of managing basically interaction within society in a different blocks.
Right. Mr. Gilbert, going back to talking about the trade war in general that is happening and ongoing between the two countries, ups and downs, its turbulence has been manifest through many of the moves by both sides. Now, when we boil it down, how much of it is because of and due to the need for technological hegemony?
Well, I think, again, here is the same thing I said. It's a matter of market access. China is a market of 1.3, 1.4 billion people. This is an enormous market that allows a company to grow and to do things that you couldn't do in a normal environment. If we look at WhatsApp, this is one of the so-called competitors of WeChat, for example. They do maybe 20% of what WeChat is doing. So on the technological level, China is progressing extremely quickly. I would say it is a race. Because the market is so big, they can invest in manpower and in financial resources to develop all these new systems. While competitors like a WhatsApp, or call it what you want, another app, they do not measure up to the same power to make a market grow. I want to come back 1 second on the security issue. As we all know, the Chinese security people, they are very clever. What they do, they infiltrate the system by users who are in TikTok, users they are, for example, in Facebook and in Twitter. They are Chinese. They look around what's going on. These people already can pinpoint some troublemakers against the Chinese government. So many people, I would not take a position here, but many people believe that if the Chinese security people knocks on the door of the TikTok company and says, hey, this user, we need some information, we all believe, or some believe, that the Chinese company has no way to refuse it and will find a kind of backdoor. They will not monitor the whole system as such, but they will pinpoint some people or some organizations.
Right. Mr. Bechari, now I want to bring to light here and into the discussion here, as Mr. Gilbert talked about, is the idea of surveillance and trying to accumulate data. And we're talking about the Chinese government here, and that's what the United States has also focused on. But hasn't the United States also been complicit in the same thing? Hasn't the technology that has been imported from the United States to other places also been complicit in the same thing?
Yes, and that was actually the point I was trying to say, that we shouldn't actually just looking at who is complicit, who is doing what is doing. I think it's much more about a trend and a digitalization of our economy, our society, of a way of being and interacting with each other that is disruptively changing what we already know. And this changing of norms and this changing of format of our own society will always tends to pose a threat of where the idea of the human condition is put, whether it's about privacy, whether it's about the content of sharing, because not every content can be shared. And I think technology have also showed its limits. When you talk about the US has always been using technology for all its own political agenda outside the US. It doesn't have to be about AI at that time, but what we talk about, the drones, of the military use of technology, which is one of the biggest investment of the US indirectly, has also been touching people for different reasons, right? While in China, it is true what Gilbert said about infiltration or backdoor, whatever. I can understand that, but I think it's also we have to understand at least the stance of China. And that stance, whether we agree or not, tends to have a certain logical pattern that goes with every single strata of the society. With the US, it's harder.
Mr. Bechari, sorry to interrupt here, but since we're short on time, I do want to introduce another guest who's just joined us, Mr. Karl Zah, who's an analyst joining us from Bali. Thank you so much, Mr. Zah, for joining us. Mr. Zah, while we're trying to make sense of this conversation, I want to know, where do you see things headed in this technological war that we're seeing unfold between the two countries, the two main superpowers, the United States and China? Where do you think things are headed in the future?
What we're looking right now, we're actually looking at a bifurcation of the internet, meaning right now it looks like there's going to be an internet for like the West, and all the countries ally with US because they try to block out the Chinese company telecom and the Chinese equipment. And then there will be the rest of the world that are perfectly okay, having Huawei build their infrastructure, building their 5G network. And we're also moving to a world where the content is also being split down the middle. I mean, it's already happening because for a long time, we know China has a great firewall. So, Chinese had built their own basically internet ecosystem within China. And now that system is kind of expanding outward. Whereas the West right now is trying to build their own wall around all the Chinese internet companies. So what we're...
Mr. Zah, this is a difficult question to place, but I do want to understand, where do you feel when we're talking about technological hegemony? Which country do you feel is closer to it, or do you think that that is too much of an abstract concept in the times we are living in which things are moving so quickly?
Well, I mean, right now, it definitely looks like U.S. is playing the defensive because China is catching up really, really quickly. And that's what I think, that's what sparked a lot of fear in U.S. I mean, there's a lot of talks about China stealing Western technology. I mean, it's all related to the fear that China is catching up quickly. China is going to eat our lunch in the West. So, I mean...
Mr. Zah, sorry to interrupt. I just want a last comment from Mr. Gilbert before we have to end the show. Mr. Gilbert, do you agree with that China is catching up pretty fast? And this anxiety that the United States is facing, of course, it is preemptive, and of course, it is also reactionary, but China is on its way.
Yes, as the gentleman from Bali said, I think China is catching up very, very quickly. Maybe the US today still has a lead, but China is quickly catching up with many, many new technologies. And this, of course, is causing some resentment in the US, but also in Europe, I would say, seeing this China becoming so strong, and the others may be being left out in the future.
Right. On that point, thank you so much, Mr. Gilbert Van Kerckhove, for joining us from Beijing. Thank you, Karl Zah, for joining us from Bali. And thank you, Moundhir, Sajjad, Bechari, for joining us from Beijing. That's all the time we have for you today, but you can watch the show again anytime on our YouTube channel. And be sure to follow us on social media at indus.news. We'll see you again tomorrow with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.